Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you for the honor. My background is boards, top teams, leadership, and you may well ask, what has that to do with our conversation? Well, I've been very impressed with the presentations made so far and the policies that are being planned and going to be delivered. The real test is not here. The real test is in the boardroom. Because throughout the world, the one challenge that has met so many societies is not the policy generation process and the thinking behind it, it is actually the reality of delivery. Now, if we take the UK before the crisis, I probably could say that 25% of boards across sectors were really good. What does good mean? Well, compliance, the financials, the concern with competitive advantage, the understanding of strategies you could help management. But the really good was the board got involved. They understood where the failures were with the management. They understood a phrase known as a fault line, a fracture point, where the strategy goes wrong. Then we had COVID. To my amazement throughout the world, I was surprised to see how many boards and management teams adjusted, especially to the technologies. And we began to see boards actually having, on a very basic level, more efficient meetings, less time spent at those meetings, more topics covered at the meetings. And I could see the chairman, the CEO, the board members being very satisfied. And if you looked into those organizations that were really good before the COVID crisis, there was an understanding of how that policy was being lived, how it was being delivered, where the points of concern were, and the board seemed to have an instinct to be able to intervene, help. Even intervene is the wrong word, it's facilitate. How many boards? About 10%. What were the other 90%? They were efficient. They looked after compliance. So if we listen to the presentations now and we looked at the stipulations, what is required by a board to make sure that the box is ticked, the process is efficiently delivered, that was there. What I also picked up was, underneath the surface, harassment. People being asked to take calls at 6 o'clock in the morning. 10 o'clock at night, they were still taking calls. Who was the person that was most vulnerable? It was the woman. 1 kid, 2 kids, 3 kids. The problem is, why can't you take a call at 12 o'clock, midday? Well, fine, well, you're at home. Surely you can do something. And we got an odd situation where hard-working men and women in particular, that had responsibilities, you could hear the kids in the background on a very important call. So what was deficient in that was the other side to the boardroom. It was the stewardship, the responsibility to really get in touch with the culture of the place and guide. Now, that has been a concern right across the world. What do we have now? Well, we just heard a reality. You've heard the reality of the Green Deal. What about the circular economy? What about the whole ESG movement? What about this whole stakeholder analysis and stakeholder engagement? If we go back to the 1980s, you'll find that there was a similar movement. It was called CSR, Corporate Social Responsibility. What happened to the CSR movement? Let me inform you, it was an utter failure. It was a show, it was a gimmick. The 1 or 2 companies that I recall that were very good, Unilever was one, Caterpillar, the American corporation, was another, and I'm finding it difficult from San Francisco to Moscow and beyond to find any other company that really made CSR a strategy. The mindset that I'm picking up with stakeholder engagement and ESG is regretfully a bit too similar. So when we looked at energy companies, we found the E bit was respected, but it was respected as a part of strategy. The problem when you got to the boardroom was, what about those issues that are not actually practical and strategic and we can implement them, but what about reputation? What about the thinking that things could go wrong? Where will it be? And where are the faults in our own organization? Where are the sensitive points? And what about risk? And I'm seeing, regretfully, too much of a CEO influence to make the strategy work, where E is a central part of the strategy, and ladies and gentlemen, that's absolutely vital. But what about the contingencies? What about the things that could go wrong? Now, business in the energy business, when we did the surveys in the UK and in parts of Europe, E was not the problem, S was. And that is a major social implication. When we went to the UK, E was okay, S was right down here at the bottom, and what was the concern that they were all working on was G, governance. And what did governance mean? It meant compliance, not the reality of how we deliver on something and make it work. With my dear colleagues at Envisia about 30 months ago, we conducted a survey here in Romania. And one of the expectations before the survey results came out was somehow the Romanians are behind the Western Europeans, are behind the Americans, are behind the British. And perhaps, yes, there were 1 or 2 points that needed development. But what amazed me was how conscious people were of their governance responsibilities and leadership responsibilities that would make the board and the management team well capable of handling some of the challenges that we're hearing today. Working in Romania with my dear colleagues, over the last 30 months, I'm amazed to see the progress. I can honestly say, from the limited experience that I have, I could take many of the colleagues that I've been working with here and I could put them into any British or American boardroom and they would hold their weight. So what I'm seeing in Romania is you have the same chances, you have the same concerns, you'll fall into the same pitfalls, you'll have the same successes as I would expect Paris and westwards. What's the implication? Post the crisis, how conscious is your board of the reality of what we've just heard today when it comes to the application of the policy as far as that organization is concerned? How conscious is the board that integrating what we've just heard as a part of strategy? The statistics right now that we've gathered are lovely policies. Of the 150 companies that I saw sign a pact in the USA on ESG, within 9 months, 143 have fallen out. In other words, they're not there to implement. What the ESG policy meant for them was, if you like, something to sell to the press and media so that it looks good. Out of 150, 7 have survived. The only reason they've survived is that they've worked very hard at board and CEO, C-suite level to ensure that they've thought through exactly what our colleagues have said here and what it means for them, their company, their stakeholders, their shareholders in particular, and also the press and media. As a final comment, are we like we were 25, 30 years ago with another social movement known as CSR? On paper, we are. In reality, there is now a major political shift. The shareholders are just about beginning to wake up. I am seeing a pretense of, I am a green shareholder, I do this, this, and this, and when you get close to them, that's not the case. But it's changing. But who is waking up, and waking up in a big way, are the press and media. Having worked with the press and media for quite some time, let me give you what it's like to be at the receiving end. I know one newspaper where they have one journalist who's targeting one CEO, and they will spend their time going through what they say, what they write, what is published, television interviews, and they will know that person intimately. And why do they do that? Because they're looking for faults on ESG, on stakeholder engagement, on anything to do with governance, and especially anything to do that goes against some of the current political trends. And why do they do that? It's very simple. They want to sell newspapers. And who's the best target of all? The chairman, the CEO, 1 or 2 prominent board members. So, ladies and gentlemen, I do hope that what we've just heard today, the institutions here, are governance ready to be able to implement what we've just heard. Because if you're not, there is a repercussion in the marketplace, and let me tell you, it's painful.